Hello, everyone. This is Rosemary Coates in Silicon Valley. I'm your host for this edition of the Frictionless Supply Chain Podcast. I'm the executive director of the Reshoring Institute, where we help companies bring manufacturing back or expand their manufacturing in the US. I'm also a contributing writer to Supply Chain Management Review. Today, I'm thrilled to have my friend Rebecca Fannin. She's a journalist and has been writing about technology first in Asia and now in the heartland of America. I first met Rebecca back in 2008 after she had published her first book, Silicon Dragon, and I had published my first book on sourcing and manufacturing in China. And so we were both writing about the rise of China at the time. But Rebecca has refocused some efforts and has recently published a new book called The Silicon Heartland, which is a fascinating tale about how the Rust Belt in America has transformed into a technology book. I have a copy right here. If anybody wants to order it, I know it's available on Amazon. So it's so important to supply chains and manufacturers that are reshoring in America or rebuilding or expanding their manufacturing in America because so many are reshoring to the Rust Belt. And with the rise of technology, that's a very supportive situation for companies to get started there. So let's get started. So welcome, Rebecca.
Well, thanks, Rosemary. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll have a good time talking about what's going on with the Rust Belt. Start off, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started researching the rise of technology in Asia and now in the US.
All right. Well, I'm born in Ohio, the Heartland. And as my journalistic career unfolded, I went to New York City. I was in magazines, writing for magazines. I became editor of International Business Magazine. I got to go to Hong Kong for the first time, and I began to see what was happening in Asia. And I have a nose for news, so I'm always trend spotting. Back then, early on, I saw the development of Asia, of China, and I went to China and I interviewed many, many leaders in China, investors, entrepreneurs, including Jack Ma of Alibaba, Neil Shen of Sequoia, the leading Sandhill Road investors who were going to China at the same time and investing all over in new technologies. So I was on the cutting edge there in China for many years. And my first book, Silicon Dragon, came out in 2008. I basically used the Silicon Dragon platform to launch a media venture, which has newsletters and events, and have continued following my nose for news into other markets, including Southeast Asia, Israel, the Heartland now. As my most recent book, Silicon Heartland, talks about the trend of the Rust Belt, which lost all these manufacturing jobs to China and to Asia and to Mexico, now rebuilding. And the timing is really good because we've seen a lot more money and a lot more energy going into rebuilding manufacturing in places like Youngstown and Pittsburgh and Flint and Cleveland and these places that were so impoverished when the jobs left. And so we need this as a country to restore, making America great again.
Yeah, so your newest book, Silicon Heartland, you've captured this phenomena. What's happening in the Rust Belt? I mean, is it just the rise of, say, software development, or is it all kinds of technologies that's going on there?
Well, it's different, very different from Silicon Valley, which tends to be focused more lately on AI, but
Yeah.
also software. In the Heartland is so much about nuts and bolts. It's
Yeah.
factories, it's 3D printing, it's robotics, it's advanced manufacturing, it's electric vehicles, it's it's things that can rust. So
Yeah.
it's even in the steel industry, new ways of making steel. You know, we saw our steel industry collapse as well. So this is all about rebuilding old technologies with new technologies and creating new jobs and training people for those new jobs. And also bringing back jobs from overseas, which I know you write a lot about the reshoring aspect of it as well.
Yeah. Well, so interesting. So tell me about your process as you're going through this. You've interviewed various leaders and so forth along the way that are describing what's happening in the Rust Belt?
Well, it was for many years that I went to China and went to Asia at least 4 times a year. So I kept United Airlines and many airlines very busy. and
I remember one time I was in Shanghai and you were there too with an event, and I
yeah,
came to your event in Shanghai. It was very interesting.
yeah, I mean, there were a circle of people who were traveling like that and who were innovators, who were definitely knowing the story and being part of it, participating in it. And so this circle still exists, although the geographies change. Many people have come back to the United States or come back to Western markets from China. But in those days, it was tremendous activity in China, real entrepreneurial culture building, accelerators, incubators, venture capitalists. I was covering venture capital in Silicon Valley before I started going to China because I was the international editor at Red Herring magazine.
You
The
work for the Financial Times also, right?
Actually I write for CNBC.
Okay.
Yeah, but also was a Forbes columnist for 10 years. So anyhow, I was always following venture capital. And I knew many of the leading venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. And uh, I basically um, looked at where they were investing, interviewed them, went to those markets, interviewed them in person in those markets, and interviewed their portfolio company founders and got a sense of what was going on in the markets. Now, I've done the same thing for the Heartland, and that happened during COVID.
Wow.
Yeah, so during COVID, I couldn't travel anymore. So, but I had this idea in the back of my mind a year before I actually even started the research that there was something happening in the Heartland. And I'm from the Heartland, so I could see it. I go back to the Ohio many times a year these days, and had been for years, but even more so these days. But I started seeing kind of a resurgence of uh, some of these places were really hit hard. Extreme poverty, extreme joblessness, the culture of diminished expectations, no hope. But
And,
then,
and that's because most of the industries was moving offshore, right? During
yeah,
the early two, and it left sort of hollowed out manufacturing in the Rust Belt, so there wasn't much left. Is that
right,
what you saw? Yeah.
exactly. And then when this new economy began developing around digital, new jobs began to be created. And now we have this manufacturing and digital combined in the heartland. And so that's a really good trend. And so I've been writing about that. So during COVID, instead of flying around, I drove around. um,
Okay.
so I put about 10,000 miles on my car, driving from New York City to Buffalo to Cleveland, Flint, all over um, for several months, and a second follow-up trip into Appalachia as well, Kentucky and West Virginia, and interviewing mayors and town champions and investors and entrepreneurs to get a good sense of what was going on. And actually, the story kept building. The more I got into it, I thought, wow, this is more than just, articles. This is a big trend. This ought to be a book. So then I started writing it, and the timing was really good. 2023, the book launched, and then we've seen all this new investment going into these regional hubs,
Yeah.
regional
So
innovation hubs.
Yeah, and I guess with the three big acts, the Infrastructure Act, the Chips and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, there's billions of dollars that are being pushed into the manufacturing environment. Although I think it's sort of a trickle right now. I mean, my take on it is it's starting to happen, but hasn't happened yet in a big way.
You
Uh,
know, the regional innovation hubs, they've now designated it to 12 hubs, and they're all on specific technologies. So they put a lot of thought into which markets are going to get the money and building upon those markets' core strengths. So that's one of the interesting things that I noticed in doing the research is that each market was so different from the next one. For instance, Youngstown, which was a steel company or steel town. Same thing with Pittsburgh. Well, they've developed differently. Pittsburgh, because of Carnegie Mellon, is really a lot about AI and robotics today. And
wow.
Youngstown, partly because of Youngstown State University, is a lot about 3D printing. So you see these industries developing based upon core strengths. Often it's tied to a university. Uh,
Yeah.
for instance, in Columbus, home to Ohio State University and Nationwide Insurance, there's a lot of insurance tech in Columbus. So it really varies by market. In Cleveland, you've got Mayo Clinic. So there's a lot of biotech going on. In Cincinnati, you've got Procter and Gamble. So there's a lot of supply chain stuff going on in Cincinnati. Indianapolis, a lot of software as a service because of a major deal that Salesforce did in Indianapolis, and mobility in Detroit. So each market is developing its own technology cluster based upon core strengths. And that was very interesting to me. It's not like Silicon Valley software, software.
Yeah.
Each place is different.
Why do you think that the Rust Belt was redeveloped in that way? I mean, what triggered it? Is it simply the investment by the U.S. government, or what caused this trend? It's quite interesting to figure out, how this happened and how we can repeat it maybe in other markets.
Well, that's right. I mean, it takes a lot of cylinders all going at the same time. The university anchors, the town leaders have to want to make it happen. Like for instance, the mayors, often a state capital where the seat of government is, tends to be a place where there's a lot of progressive action. So I think in some places venture capital has had an impact. For instance, there are some Silicon Valley firms that are now investing in the Heartland and have set up shop in the Heartland, such as Drive Capital in Columbus, Ohio. That firm has invested in about 70 startups. In,
Wow.
yeah, 70. And there, it was formed by two partners from Sequoia Capital. They moved to Columbus, Ohio and set up Drive Capital. And
Wow,
yeah, they got money. They got money from Ohio State University. I mean, the money has to come from somewhere. So often there's a university that is an anchor investor in wanting to um, transition these economies.
yeah, that's really interesting because I don't think that's a very well-known fact that so many universities have investment funds as they're seeing trends happen. Like Stanford, for example, here in Silicon Valley, does a lot of investing in startups. So they have funds available to help, particularly students that have an idea and are going to start up in that regard. I
Yeah.
I see a lot of my clients too have um, reason to be connected with a university. I had a water filtration client a couple of years ago that wanted to locate near universities that were doing bioengineering and could do some deep dive into water research. So, that was the particular for a location when they were building a factory that was near a university that was doing that kind of research. And that's an important connection, I think, that isn't very visible when companies are, choosing a new factory location.
Well, that's true too. And corporate venture capital is important too. For instance, some of the companies that I wrote about in my Silicon Heartland book they have technology. For instance, one of them in southeastern Ohio on the Ohio River, in a place that is an opioid capital of the nation,
Wow.
unfortunately, has technology from Procter and Gamble in plastics recycling. And it's leading edge plastic recycling. They have built a huge factory there, and it's a going operation. But that technology came from Procter and Gamble. So
Wow.
they're always like, there's all these cylinders have to be firing: the corporate, the university, the state capital, the talent that's there. People have to want to live someplace too. This
Yeah.
doesn't just happen automatically. You've got to have the talent that wants to, stay there and not go to the coast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I would imagine that some of these communities have a high unemployment rate and
Yeah,
have skilled workers that are out of a
yeah,
job. So, it makes
yeah.
it kind of a nice instant base for employment as well.
Right, right. I don't think it's enough yet to really replace all the jobs that were lost overseas, but it is happening, and yeah, it's a very positive trend for the whole United States.
Yeah, so can you tell us about a few famous people you've interviewed along the way? I know lots in China, and some in the US. So give us a few examples of famous people you've been able to talk to while you were doing all of this research over the past 25 years or so.
Well, John Chambers comes to mind, the head of Cisco for many, many years. Cisco was as famous as NVIDIA is today,
Yeah.
and it was the stock market darling for many years. And John Chambers ran that. He's originally from West Virginia, and he's quoted in my book quite liberally because he's very quotable, but also because he speaks from the heart, and he's also giving back to the region. He's set up a venture capital unit in West Virginia, which desperately needs that at West Virginia University, his alma mater. And he is out there all the time talking to students and young people about the opportunities in some of these most impoverished areas. So John Chambers, I give him high marks. There are other people like that. The former CEO of Intuit in Silicon Valley. He actually moved from Silicon Valley back to West Virginia, his
Wow.
home state, and became president of Marshall College in West Virginia. And so he's also leading change. This is somebody, who had one of the top leaders in Silicon Valley. Intuit was one of the most successful companies. And he left Silicon Valley to go back to his home state to help revive it. And he's also been behind this whole initiative to relocate people to the state and actually pay them to
Wow.
move there. So, but these are, it's a real contest. You've got to apply for it. There's the people are selected every year, and then what they intend them to do is to come to the market, settle there, and help to create this entrepreneurial culture from within.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so that's a big initiative that he has helped to start in West Virginia. John Chambers was behind that too. There's other people like Albert Ratner of Cleveland. He's from Cleveland. He's a major industrialist who's known as Mr. Cleveland because
Okay.
he's invested so much money in Cleveland. But anyhow, when I interviewed him, um, it was very interesting to me that he is helping these young people who are at NPOs or nonprofit organizations and non-government organizations to help them figure out strategies to retrain workers in their areas. So
Yeah.
I give him high marks. There are other
No,
people
we
going
always
back.
say, yeah, I mean, there's a low unemployment rate in the US right now, and there are a lot of job openings, particularly in manufacturing.
Yeah,
And we always say it's not it's not that we have unemployable people, it's that they don't have the right skills.
Right,
And the skills, as technology changes and manufacturing evolves, so the workers have to evolve
right,
and get retrained on new skills, new
right,
technologies,
right.
new machines that they'll be using.
Sure.
Everybody, I mean, back in, when I started my career, manufacturing was like a big dark hole sort of.
Yeah,
In today's environment, manufacturing, has computers at every station. People
yeah,
have to know how to operate various software as they're moving
right,
their production along the line,
right.
to quality check or to test things or to move inventory from one place to another. They have to know how to communicate via email. You know,
Yeah,
these are skills that my grandfather worked in steel production, and these are skills that he would never have imagined. This is a completely different kind of job market,
right.
and we have to think not only in the development of manufacturing and technology in parallel, but also how do we produce the kinds of workers that are going to be needed for those environments. Yeah.
Exactly. I agree entirely. And this is where community colleges are playing their part
Yeah.
too
Uh-huh.
on vocational training. For instance, Lorraine Community College up by Cleveland, they are training engineers to actually work for Intel at its new semiconductor plant in Ohio. And
Ah,
that semiconductor plant is about 35 miles from my home, from my family home in
okay.
Ohio. So, I'm seeing it up close. There's even a new Google data center in my hometown. Who know that Google would buy farmland and develop a data
A
center,
data
a mega
center.
center.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyhow, it's happening, and a lot of this is Silicon Valley driven. Intel is a Silicon Valley company, and here they are right outside of Columbus, Ohio, with a huge new plant going on. It's going to totally transform the area.
Yeah.
When I speak about this, and I've spoken to quite a few places about this trend. When I talk to the locales, they get this nervous look on their face. So I say, this is going to totally transform the area. And they seem so nervous. I don't blame them because, many of them are not ready for the infrastructure
Right.
requirements.
Right, right, right. And I think that's where the infrastructure bill will help
Yeah,
rebuild roads and bridges and access to these places that had substandard roads and so forth in the past. I mean, you have to have transportation availability and infrastructure in a lot of different ways, not only roads and bridges, but also high speed internet. You have
right.
to have electricity, water, all these things are part of that infrastructure surrounding any kind of new manufacturing. So, wow, it's just so positive to hear that there are all these good trends happening in manufacturing in America. I'm just thrilled to hear about it. It's really
Yeah.
great.
Because when you drive around, you could see the devastation firsthand. Drive through Detroit. There are factories that are still there with the weeds growing through them.
Wow.
And Gary, Indiana, same thing. We're in the middle of this transformation. This is not over yet. This is happening now. And I hope that we get some of those factories torn down, or some of them are beyond repurposing, but yeah, yeah,
Are
definitely.
we, are we in this kind of redevelopment? Are we competing with China? Are we keeping up? Are we ahead of China? What do you think?
Well, it's yeah, on some sectors, it's a very close competition. I would say electric vehicles, China is getting an edge in electric vehicles. In AI, which is one of these foundational technologies, I would say Silicon Valley is the world leader in AI. In other things, robotics is very strong all across Asia. And the Japanese were, very instrumental in getting that just-in-time manufacturing and these inventory management principles in place. So we've learned some lessons from Asia, and some we've incorporated, and they've learned some lessons from us as well. But I would say it's very close, and it depends on the technology, the particular technology. But lately, there's been a lot of other cross currents, as we know, and the U.S.-China relationship is not nearly as strong business-wise as it once was, and we're seeing this polarization. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot of competition because both markets want to be first.
Yeah. It's surprising. Yeah, you and I both know, having gone to China so many times in the early 2000s, how vibrant it was and how energetic it was and how, people were so anxious. And then the pandemic hit. I had an opportunity to go to China a couple of months ago in July, with a trade group, and I was a little hesitant, I gotta say. I wasn't sure how I would be received, we would be received,
Right,
now after the pandemic, and there was so much China bashing and America bashing and so forth going on geopolitically.
right,
But we this was a trade mission to Lanzhou out in the Silk Road area, and we were received with open arms. I mean, it was just as enthusiastic as 20 years ago in Shanghai. I mean, people are anxious to do business with America, and I think that trade kind of mentality is rebuilding a little bit as well. So, that may be uh, a spot where companies manufacturing in America can sell into and vice versa. So I think we may see a little rebounding there as well.
right.
What are the most important technology trends that you see now? Of course, we know about AI. Are there other trends that you're following, in technology that are important?
Well, the whole idea of supply chain management,
Yeah,
yeah, is a priority. We see almost every day now. Now we've got the strike going on. During COVID, uh, yeah, there was the idea that maybe we're going to run out of everything. The
yeah,
grocery shelves were going empty. So yeah, I think supply chain has become a much bigger priority, and it's
yeah.
tied in to so many other aspects of business. It's so integral.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
there's a enormous rise in technology and supply chain as well. So, particularly software to control where in the world your goods are, how do you move them along, how do you, control inventory. There are all these things, and those are related to software,
yeah,
being able to give you data and information regarding your supply chain, especially with these long global supply chains that require much more information than we ever did in the past. So that's really true. I think there's a big emphasis on supply chain development for sure.
hmm And figuring out where to put your supply chains. Are they going to stay in China? Are they going to move somewhere else in Asia? Are they going to move to Mexico? There's a whole
Yeah.
strategy
Yeah,
around
Mexico.
it.
Mexico's a whole other topic. We've been doing a lot of consulting work with manufacturers wanting to go to Mexico. So, Rebecca, you've had such a long, successful career. What advice do you have for women, and particularly women that might be listening, and also men as they develop their careers?
Well, I see a lot of people who talk a big game. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but then they don't do it. And so you have to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
You have to get to it. I'm a doer, and I think that's helped me a lot. I've written 4 books in 12 years, and four and a half. Actually, another was a textbook chapter. And so I'm constantly doing, and I'm constantly out there communicating with other people who are experts. As you can't just be in a silo. You've got to be able to be part of the community. You've got to be part of the information flow, and that's very important. So I think those elements have helped me a lot, and I would recommend them for others to be a doer and to be part of the information flow, to be part of the community.
Ah, very good. That's very good advice. Just do it, huh? Yeah. Yeah.
Just do it.
A
And
famous slogan.
when I moved to New York City, I moved to New York City from Ohio and became an editor of magazines in New York. I did it. Then I went to Silicon Valley. I got involved in technology and venture capital. I did it. Then, China did it. And, then following, like I said, the nose for news, but the nose for news always makes me want to do something about it.
Ah, terrific. That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Rebecca. It was so interesting to talk to you, as always. Can you give us your contact information if listeners want to order their own copy of Silicon Heartland or get in touch with you?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Rebecca Fannin, and on Instagram at Silicon Lands. And my email, silicondragonventures.com. It's a website with all of our materials on the website. So that's silicondragonventures.com. And of course, my books on Amazon, actually all of them, including the translated editions. So they're all there, and those are good ways to contact me.
Terrific. And you can listen to more Frictionless Supply Chain podcasts posted on Supply Chain Management Review's landing page, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can reach me, Rosemary Coates, at rcoates@reshoringinstitute.org and visit our website, www.reshoringinstitute.org, where we publish all of our research on manufacturing in America. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks again, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rosemary.